Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments HQ, a podcast sharing, exploring, and celebrating stories of change through mindset and wellness and the impact on relationships. We are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Siria Gutierrez, along with my co-host, Melissa Robena. On this episode, we discuss enmeshed families. We talk about how enmeshment can arise from trauma, identifying this particular family dynamic, and how you can start changing this for yourself. All right, today we're going to talk about enmeshed families, and I believe part of the reason we're doing it is because, Melissa, you got curious about me bringing up the term before.
Well, so I'm close with my family. I would consider myself a family person, and then when you mentioned enmeshed families in passing and how my family resembled one, I was like, what the hell is that? So I had no idea what enmeshed families were until I looked it up, and it definitely fall underneath that category.
Yes, and for our listeners, an enmeshed family enmeshment is a psychological term that describes the blurring of boundaries between people, specifically in families, that this could be a dynamic that you have. And so situations where you might be in an enmeshed family is where parents treat their kids like their friends and share way too much personal information and don't necessarily parent. That line is not there. And in addition to that, the expectation is that you are going to be just as open and forthright with your family members. Does that sound at all like something that has happened to you, Melissa?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so absolutely. And so it's funny because I remember when I first started seeing my counselor, it was not under the best of circumstances. My life was chaotic. My husband and I were talking about separating, or we were separated, and we were talking about reconciliation. And so my first counseling session, to hell with everything else that was going on in my life, guess what I brought up? It was my family and how I was so upset that they didn't seem interested in like what was going on in my life. And I remember my counselor just kind of looked at me and was like, well, why do you care so much like what your family thinks? And, I was just always under the impression that, we're just really strong and we're really close. But after kind of looking into enmeshed families, strong family ties is not what it is. It's definitely an enmeshed family, for sure.
And it is something that is very generational. It is a learned generational pattern.
Well, and I also learned that it's also can surface through trauma. And that's actually when I started to notice this dysfunctional dynamic in my family. And it was when my parents separated. That's when the dynamics between my parents and I changed, because I know that I talk a lot about, or I've shared off air with you about the dynamics between my mother and I. And listeners, I have daddy issues and I was estranged from him for a while, but the lines were very much blurred. And I think that that's because they no longer were my parents at that point. They wanted to be my friend, because it was now you're using the kids as pawns. And so they wanted to appeal to like, look at me, like, I'm your friend, and some of the things that they shared, no child should ever know. I don't need to go into detail.
Oh, you might, because I'll ask. But we'll see where the conversation goes. But I'm curious, how old were you again? Was it 12?
12.
When this happened? Okay, so what was your family like before that makes you think that there's this line in the sand that happened in the dynamics?
Because I was very sheltered, and our lives were private. I didn't know the intimate nature of my parents' love life, or their emotional needs weren't dependent upon me. I wasn't in charge of taking care of the kids. So I wasn't parentified at that point. I was very much a child. And it wasn't until they split that the dynamics changed. And, I was kind of thrown into like the parent. And I just remember from that time on that mantra of you do for your family. I think you and I have talked about this off air, is just, it was so strong. Because I think off air, you and I have talked about just like why it could be that I'm closer with my family than it is for you and your family. And I think I told you, it's like, I was just always told you do for family. And so I never thought that there was any sort of dysfunction until I was really looking at what behavior of a child in a enmeshed family is. And I basically hit every single one of those. And I'll just take a moment. There's like 6 criterias. First one, and this is from healthline.com. 1, you don't have a strong sense of who you are. And I think, when you're hearing that, you're thinking, okay, well, a lot of people don't know who they are. Number 2 is you don't think about your needs, but rather you focus on the needs of others. Very much true. As a people pleaser, in that people pleasing episode, I go into depth about that. Number 3, you make sure that your goals are in line with what your parents want for you without considering what you need. And I'll expound on that in a little bit. Number 4, you feel guilty about your need for space. 5, you avoid conflict and don't know how to say no. And the last one, number 6, is you feel like you must solve the challenges your family members face. Each of those boxes I check. And that's not to say, I'm not going to blame my parents. I mean, I know that they were the ones that helped construct this, but I don't know what it was that they saw growing up or the dynamics they saw growing up. I really don't think that it was an enmeshed family until now, but I think you pointed it out, Siria, that there's really no room for outsiders when you have an enmeshed family. Even the spouses that my siblings and I have married or dated, they're considered outsiders. And there seems to be no privacy. If a sibling
that's a huge hallmark of an enmeshed family, is the lack of privacy.
And that's the thing. It's like, if I don't want to share, like when my husband and I were separated, I didn't want to share every detail with my mother. But I felt bad if I didn't. And there was a time where my mom's like, we're no longer going to be a family of secrets. But at the same time, I feel like there's some things that it's okay for me to keep private, that I want to keep private. And me withholding that from you isn't to say that we don't have a good mother-daughter relationship. I just don't want to tell you everything, because especially when I was separated, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted. And until I'm clear about what I want, I'm not really willing to share that with you. And again, it also comes down to, I really don't know what a mother-daughter relationship looks like, or even a father-daughter relationship. So when the dynamics change, especially in adolescence, I was 12 years old, it really kind of blurred the lines of where my identity stops and theirs began, because it was just so, like you said, I mean, the term enmeshed, it really is what it is.
Right. And so you have a couple of those different aspects, right? So we can talk about so many different things with it. I actually really like this topic because I think it's so fascinating that families can do this. My family's different. And the reason that it's different, and my counselor and I just came on this in my last counseling session, is because I was removed from most of my family and brought from Central America to California. And so having that separation, and then having an additional separation that happened at about the same age, about 12 years old or so, where my mom drew the line in the sand and had said, I'm not engaging with your dad's side of the family anymore. And I felt as though I had to pick sides, and I picked her side. That isolated me even more from the different family dynamics that were going on. And so, part of the hallmark is the lack of boundaries, and that feeling like you can't have secrets, where they tell you can't have secrets from me, and that guilt associated with, how dare you have the secret, and that could cross over into violations of your privacy in terms of always opening the door, insisting, taking the door off. I've seen that happen. Like, that's crazy. Did that happen to you? Someone take your door off?
Yeah. But that was because I was acting out as a kid. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life. And so I think so my door was removed, and it was, privacy is a privilege, not a right. So
privacy is a privilege, not a right. Did they read your diary?
Oh, I don't know. Probably. I don't know. I didn't keep diaries because that was, okay, I've watched enough crime shows to know you don't write shit down. You don't document or record shit. So no, I did not put anything discriminating down. But I just, when we talk about, and that was part of the reason why I went away to school. I struggled mightily.
Hold on. Like, how long was your door gone for?
Oh, God, I don't remember. Maybe a couple of weeks.
Was it your dad who did that or your mom?
Mother.
Really?
Yeah.
That is fascinating to me. I've only seen it like done hypothetically, and
Mommy dearest right there. No, I'm not. My mom is a good mom. She really is. I mean, when my dad kicked me out, she's the one that has been there to support me. But I think that, she had me at a young age. I was very mature for my age. I was the oldest and probably most dependable one. So I understand that, yeah, there are times where a person's going to have to step up. Maybe their parents lost their job and they need to help pay the bills. I get that. But at some point, though, you need to encourage your kids to move on. And there was a moment, and I remember I was driving in the car with my mom, and we were out in Fresno. I think I was there visiting for one of the Nibblings' birthdays or something. And we're driving around Fresno. And originally, I went to Cal State Northridge, but I had also applied to Fresno State because it was going to be closer and I could be near my family. And I got accepted to both. And I just knew that if I stayed, it just wasn't healthy for me. I couldn't tell you at the time why I felt so strongly about the need to leave, but I just knew that I needed to. Mm-hmm. And so I accepted, the invitation to go to Cal State Northridge. But I was talking about it with my mom as we're driving around Fresno. I was like, God, how different my life would have been had I stayed in Fresno. Because I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have done or experienced a lot of the things that are my life now. And she's like, I was really tempted to have you stay. Because she's like, I know you were teetering. And I know that if I wanted to, I could have guilted you to staying. And she could have. She could have easily swayed me. But she's like, I know that it would have been selfish for me to do that. But she's like, I struggled with that because I wanted you to stay. Mm-hmm. And that was a big moment for her and for me because, wow, for her to see that and not only see it, but then tell me, because she's absolutely right. I would have stayed.
Well, and I think part of becoming more mature and part of, being a wise old adult or whatever is seeing your parents and seeing that they make mistakes, right? And not necessarily holding them against them. It's not that she was a bad mom. Like that choice maybe wasn't the greatest one, but she did the best that she could under the circumstances of having, a strong-willed child who was rebelling at the time, if you wanted to phrase it that way. Like there's many different things there. So it's not necessarily a criticism, but just like, hey, this is something that happened. And I know for myself, like I could at least close the door. Locking the door was always like suspect. But
you had locks on your doors?
I did have locks on my doors.
Did not.
Had those. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing that I'm surprised, but then I think I'm not. So going to the 6 items though, I think that's really interesting of just the different ways that you can check off whether or not you were a child in here. And so you said that you wanted to talk about your goals. That was I think that was topic 3. What was it about your goals that triggered for you?
There were certain things that I wanted to explore in high school, different clubs or different sports. And I couldn't because the family needed me. I needed to pick the kids up or something like that. Again, that parentified, like I'm taking care of my siblings. So there were certain things that I couldn't do. Like if I wanted to, in high school, you engage in things, you participate in things to kind of find your identity, find your purpose. And I feel that was somewhat restrictive for me because I had parental obligations for children that weren't mine. And so my goals had to shift so that they were in alignment with what was best for the family. And so I think that's what I mean by number 3 in terms of, making sure that your goals are in line with what your parents want rather than considering what's best for you.
I think you just said it though. It's what is best for the family. And so that's the mentality. So it's this group herd mentality of you have to do what's best for the family. And so for the family, it's going to be best for you to do this, for you to, possibly go to Fresno State and stay closer to home. Or, it's better for you to do this and you always have to put the family first. And that is one of those mantras. And that's not to say that healthy families don't have that. Healthy families may have that. The difference is they're going to allow you to do that exploration of yourself. and they're going to also allow you to be your full self. So sometimes in enmeshed families, you have to buy into the full culture. And if you don't buy into it with, say for example, I was listening to like baseball fans. Okay. If you're in this family and you're a Red Sox fan, you have to hate the Yankees. You just have to, period. End of story. Right. If you don't buy into that and you're in an enmeshed family, you are challenging the identity of the whole group. You're not allowed to do that in an enmeshed family. A healthy family is going to let you have that difference. Now, with those particular sports teams, it's questionable. You could bring over somebody who's from the other side in a dating relationship and not have it totally fail. But in an enmeshed family, it's an attack on the whole system.
It really is. And as I was looking into enmeshed families, they were talking about alliances that are formed and, recreated. And there are alliances in the family, even in the immediate family. So there are individuals, if they're listening, they know who they are, that are closer to certain parents than others. And when there's a disagreement, you are expected to basically like choose sides on every issue. It can't just be like, well, I can kind of see where both of y'all are coming from. It's almost as if, there's like this possessiveness to where it's like, you have to turn to each other for help and support, and you have to choose sides. And I'm like, well, can I just sit out of this one? Because I don't really care. And that's as I'm becoming more aware. And it's funny because I didn't know the term enmeshed families, but I knew that I didn't like how I felt when I was so intricately involved in everything. And it's like, I don't even live in the same state. Why do I care what is going on between siblings or what? I don't. It doesn't impact me. But somehow I would find that I would get dragged into it because I'm the caretaker. That was my role in the family. So I would get brought in to basically solve the challenges, be the mediator. And I'm just like, I don't want to do it. So I started to separate myself. And that is a taboo for enmeshed families. I was like ostracized.
Yeah, no, you're not allowed to do that at all. I think one of the things that came up for me in our discussion right now is one of my college friends, when she got married, she got a ton of different advice. There were different rituals that her family did for her wedding. And I just remember the advice that she got from her mom. And it was shared wisdom. And now I can share it with all of you, which was, when you have your fights, don't come to us and tell us about your fights with your spouse. And it's not because we don't love you and we don't want to support you. It's because when you get back together, we're still going to know about the fight and do those other things. So it was permission and an invitation to say, you know what, you can keep some things in your marriage to yourself. And that's okay, because we want to see the good things that are going on. And obviously if like there was abuse or other things, they would want to know that. But it was more of, don't come running to us every single time you guys have a fight because he didn't empty out the dishwasher the way you wanted. Like, we don't need that kind of negativity to come with everybody else, because that's still the person that you chose, and that's still the person that you love, and you're going to go back to them anyways, right? Because in this particular family, divorce is not something that I think they would really consider. But that stuck with me because, like, wow, like what a nice way to just say, hey, handle your business. We still love you. We're still here for you, but you don't have to come and tell us every single little thing that happens. Just don't do it. And I think some families in an enmeshed family, like that would never fly. Never in a million years would you be allowed to say, don't tell me all this stuff. In fact, it's like, why aren't you telling me about this? Why aren't you telling me about how many times you guys are having sex a week, or how many times, or the fact that he's terrible with money, and like all of these things. Like, oh my gosh, there's just so many things that, like you said, can be private, that you want to keep to yourself and that you want to share with certain people. Not everybody deserves to know your story, and that includes your family.
Absolutely. And to the point, kind of what you just said, that was part of the reason why when my husband and I were separated, I didn't tell my family everything. I mean, they would ask how he's doing, but I'd keep it brief. Again, because one, I didn't know where it was going, but two, if I did get back together with this person, I don't want you to like know all the like nitty gritty stuff, unless there was like physical or some sort of domestic abuse, then, or substance abuse, then I can understand concern. But you have to trust me as an adult that I know what I'm doing. Now, I might come to you and say, for you to hear me out. Because sometimes I don't need you to tell me what to do. Sometimes I just need you to listen. Although that's definitely not how my family works. But, sometimes I just want you to listen. And, but that is definitely why I kept some of the things private. It wasn't because I didn't love my family. It wasn't because I didn't trust them with what I was sharing, because I know that if I called any one of my family members, they would be here tonight, if I needed them. So there is that sense of loyalty, but there are just some things I wish to keep to myself.
And I think that's fair. And I mean, there are some things that I wish my parents would have kept to themselves, particularly my dad. Like every single time he would get in trouble, it was almost like he was asking for absolution from me. And I was like, okay, so you had an affair and you want me to know about this? Like, why? I'm not in your relationship, actually. Like, that's actually you two adults. And you're sitting there like awkward teenager, like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Like, it did nothing for me. And so just kind of looking back, it's like, okay, there could be qualities of boundary crossing, right? Like that was definitely a boundary crossing moment, but that side of the family is not enmeshed. I don't think it is. I think it's very separate. Maybe each little nucleus might be a little enmeshed in themselves, and that's a whole nother thing. But then when I look at my mom's side of the family, specifically with her sisters, that to me seems very, very enmeshed, where they were involved in very super involved in each other's lives. And my mom was several thousand miles away here in Guatemala, here in the US, and her sisters are in Guatemala. And I just remember two of her sisters got into an argument over a man. And one of them was super dramatic, and maybe I shouldn't minimize it, but she was very upset about the process, and she had been threatening to kill herself and do all these things, and then there was all these details about what had been going on in this affair, and just all of this stuff was like, you guys just still managed to wrap my mom in, and her not even being there, not even being present, to the point that to this day, those two aunts can barely be in the same room together. And I'm just like, okay, well, I understand that there were some violations that happened here, but I think the other violation that happened was the way you guys interacted with one another, and just giving way too much detail about what had happened.
Well, and I can see how trauma definitely can create the environment for enmeshed families to happen. So speaking personally, at 12, when my parents split, and the woman, the step monster that my dad later dated, really caused me and my siblings to really lean on each other, to really depend on each other. My mother was in a difficult spot. I mean, my father was, I still believe, the love of her life. So she was dealing with that. And so in tough times, what you do is you lean on those closest to you. Yet, and we were like that for years. And I think that as we grew older, we never, as the situation got better and we got stronger, or we, left the house, those dynamics never changed, because we never addressed them again. We still interacted as if the trauma was still happening, and we were still leaning on each other. And there's no problem in leaning on each other, but I think that we just never redefined what those relationships or those boundaries look like now, being healthy adults.
And based on what you're saying and kind of what I was just connecting with my aunt, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the fact that it was mostly women, because this was before Megan transitioned, right? So having at that point female siblings, do you think that was part of it too? Because it sounds like the enmeshment was with your siblings and your mom more than anything, because it doesn't sound like your dad was in it. Or
my dad would have to be present for there to be an enmeshment. There we go. I did our daddy issue quota for the episode.
Thank you. We were running short.
I don't know. I don't think it has to necessarily do with females. I think that, without going into too much detail, I think my mother, we were hers. And I think that I don't know if she felt threatened by these other women that were coming into her life, or the fact that my dad left, so this fear of abandonment. So I'm going to keep all those closer to me. And it was also, I really think it was survival. I mean, we were so, it was such a traumatic experience with my dad left. Mm-hmm. And I think that we were able to provide emotional support for each other. And I think because my mom didn't really have really close friends there. So I think she turned to her children for that support. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge responsibility for a 12-year-old. And I think that, you know, I like that I was getting attention from my mom, right? I was getting attention from a parent, you know, and the fact that, you know, my dad left. So I really wanted to keep this relationship with my mom really strong, and I wanted to appease her, and I wanted to take away her suffering. So I would try to step up in any way that I could, which I think only exasperated the situation. And I think all my siblings felt that way towards my mother, which is why I think all the siblings kind of have this dynamic with my mother as opposed to my father. But again, my father isn't in the picture. So, you know, I think that's why we see it just with the females at this point.
At that particular
point, exactly.
Okay. But now you're 35-year-old Melissa. You're not 12-year-old Melissa anymore. So how would you want your family dynamic to be now?
Well, I've already started to shift that. Again, it started with just removing myself from the situation, because I needed to get clear on what it is that I want. And this is when I really started to work on myself, go to counseling, identify, because since I don't know what a healthy relationship looks like, either with my parents, I get to define what that looks like for me. And if they can be involved in the discussion and co-create these boundaries so that it's, you know, a win-win for both, even better. But I need to do what's best for me. And I know that we've mentioned this on the pod. It's like, if you don't put yourself first or consider yourself first, no one will. So I was, you know, I had to fight through the feeling of being selfish, because that went against everything that I had been told at that point, which is you do for family. Now I'm doing for myself. Completely different shift. And that took me years to do. But again, it started with just separating myself and establishing new boundaries, and not feeling bad about saying no. We want to hear from you. What type of family dynamic do you believe you have? Let us know on our Instagram or our private Facebook group, Pivotal Moments HQ. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening. Remember, it's never too late and you're right on time.